So you want to learn biology, but you don't know where to start. Well, in this video, I'm going to tell you 6 of the books that I think are really good beginning introductory books to biology because, let's be honest, the big B, it's a big topic, biology, and it's hard to know where to start. And so I'm just going to share some of my recommendations that were really useful for me when I did my undergrads and A-levels and masters and now my PhD. So hopefully you'll also find these books useful. Now, biology is a big topic, ranges from how we go from a single cell to full organism, to plants, to immune systems, to why we age and why we die. And speaking of living and dying, my first recommendation is How We Live and Why We Die, The Secret Life of Cells by Lewis Wolpert. Now, there's a reason why many universities have this as a sort of preliminary reading essential material for biology courses, basically because it's a really great overview of a lot of topics in biology. It's a kind of a nice warm-up introduction, which is pretty accessible for most people to read. And it ranges from talking about how cells work together to introducing topics like development, cancer, and stem cells. And it even has a chapter on why we age, which my viewers may find interesting. And for sure, like some of the technologies it talks about now are probably a little bit out of date, but the core principles remain the same. At the end of the day, this video is about telling you what books provide you with these core principles in biology that once you have this foundation, you can kind of dip into any sort of area of interest. Now, as a bonus book, I'd also recommend a similar book, What is Life by Paul Nurse. Paul Nurse was involved in the discovery of genes that play a really important role in the cell cycle regulation. And if none of those words made any sense to you, then you should probably read this book. And speaking of genes, the next book I would recommend is The Gene by Siddhartha Mukherjee. And this book is basically the story of the gene, an intimate history, as the book says. And it really is an intimate history. Intimate in the sense that it goes through all of the different events from the first discovery of genes and the concept of genes and how genetic material is inherited, all the way through to looking at the kind of implications of understanding this kind of coding of information in the genome and CRISPR and all these other applications that have come from it and the eugenics movement. And it's also intimate in the sense that Siddhartha sort of interweaves his own personal life history into the book as well to make it a way more enjoyable read. So it's comprehensive, it's insightful, and given that it's also more of a historical book, it's still largely up to date. So I really would recommend this book. And keeping with the theme of genes, my next recommendation is Gene Machine, The Race to Discover the Secrets of the Ribosome by Venki Ramakrishnan, who is a group leader at the LMB here in Cambridge. Now, I was fortunate enough to get a signed copy by him when I was there for the summer, but that's not why it's on my list of good books. It's a really important book to read to have an understanding of what it's like to be in a sort of research lab environment. And it still has a lot of technical learning material to learn about the ribosome if you want to. So the ribosome being a massive complex that is involved in translation, so how you go from mRNA to protein. But it also kind of feels like exciting reads. You get to know what it's like to see scientists compete and find novel discoveries, and I think it's hard. I've never quite read a book like it, as the world of science is kind of often ignored. And so if you're thinking, I like biology, I want to learn about it, then it's also important to learn about what it's like to be a scientist, especially in the biology space. A bonus book in this category would be A Crack in Creation, which is a memoirs written by Jennifer Doudna, who you probably know as being one of the discoverers of the CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing system. Now, the next book I also don't have on me, because I got it from the library when I first read it, and this is the Epigenetics Revolution by Nessa Carey. I say this book, as somewhat suggested, is all about epigenetics, these modifications that happen on top of the genetic sequence. So they could be protein modifications, they could be modifications to DNA. And basically this sort of influences how genes are read within the cell. And so this was kind of the book that really made me go, oh, I love biochemistry. So I have to recommend it for that reason, and I don't really want to say much more. Again, it's a good educational book and it's pretty accessible, at least in my opinion. Now, my next recommendation has to, of course, be a textbook. You have to read a textbook at some point if you want to learn biology. Now, you can either just jump straight into the sort of gold standard textbook, The Molecular Biology of the Cell by Alberts. Or if you want to have a more gentle introduction, then I honestly always recommend picking up revision guides for A-level or GCSE. Because essentially, as I said earlier, you just want to have a foundational level of biology that you can then build upon. And that's what these books are great at doing. The molecular biology of the cell is, if anything, too informative. Like, if you quizzed me on it, I wouldn't remember all the facts. But it has everything you could possibly need. Again, it's probably a bit out of date, but in terms of the bare bones, understanding what the cell structure is like, understanding the core things that cells do, you can't beat it. And obviously, if you buy the most recent edition, it's quite expensive. But again, because you don't have to worry so much about the latest findings, you want to use it as a sort of starting point, you can totally just get one of the older editions quite cheaply. At least that's what I did. And I turned out okay, maybe. So it's fine. You can do it too. And so that brings me on to book 6. And me being a researcher on P53, of course I had to suggest this book, P53, The Gene That Cracked the Cancer Code. And again, this is by Sue Armstrong, and this has kind of got a journalistic vibe. So it's similar to Gene Machine in that it sort of describes the process of scientific discoveries, and therefore makes it a very interesting read. And again, will just sort of excite you about some of the things that happen in biological research. And also the struggles that come with this as well. You know, the fact that I'm researching P53 shows that we still haven't really cracked the code. Maybe it's a little bit of a clickbaity title. But I would highly recommend that if you're interested in, for example, cancer research. An alternative book recommendation is The Music of Life. Again, it was a library book that I read. So that's more of a systems biology book if you're interested in understanding the information that the DNA sequence doesn't provide us. Again, it was just an interesting book. I mean, there's so many great biology books, and I've yet to read them all myself too. So anyway, that's how I would get started if I was going to begin reading biology books without my current knowledge. So I'm pretty certain that, I would recommend starting with a textbook or some revision guides, and then building yourself up gently. And once you've got these foundational concepts, you can then pretty much jump into any sort of area of interest. Because biology isn't just about remembering protein names, which, okay, fine, to some extent it is. But at the same time, it's about having, just being aware of the kind of fundamentals. Now, I've been a bit vague about what these fundamentals are, and I'm planning to make a video on that sometime soon. So just hang about for that. Otherwise, I hope this video has been informative, and thank you to my Patreon supporters, and thank you for listening.